I knew the room was too quiet for a family dinner before dessert. That kind of quiet doesn't arrive by accident. It waits for its cue. The candles were doing their best to pretend this was a celebration. Cinnamon, roast, fresh linen. Everything looked warm enough to fool a stranger. I wasn't a stranger. My daughter cleared her throat like someone who had practiced. On my left, her husband straightened the silverware he wasn't going to use and stared at the spot where a signature would go if the night went his way. The neighbor, the one who always appears when the house smells like sugar, folded his napkin twice, then twice more. People who know you can sense a storm even when you're smiling. She slid a folder toward me. Beige. Too plain to be innocent. It stopped where my dessert plate should have been. In its shadow, a pen. Blue ink. Aligned with the table's edge like a runway. If you won't co-sign his loan, she said, steady voice, steady hands, then don't stay here. No raised voices. No banging fists. Just a sentence dressed like a policy. The words were careful. The decision behind them was not. Across from me, her husband sat back with the confidence of someone who thinks a room is a witness, not a crowd. That I rested my fingers on the folder and opened it. Paper tells you how many hands it has. Met. This stack had been touched, discussed, argued with, maybe blessed in a kitchen huddle while gravy simmered. The first page was the kind of contract that calls itself an opportunity until you read past the adjectives. Numbers that look smaller when you don't add them up. A collateral clause with hands that reach into other people's homes. It's a formality, he said, the smile that comes free with bad advice settling on his face. Family helps family. Family doesn't gamble with the same roof twice, I said, evenly. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the line where they wanted my name to sit like a promised. My daughter's eyes flickered, the way they did when she was 7 and thought blinking would turn a wish into a fact. She had my eyes once. Tonight they belonged to urgency. She breathed in, slow and practiced. Dad, we've talked about this. No, I said softly. You talked. I listened. Cutlery can be louder than arguments. Somewhere near the centerpiece, a fork kissed a plate and confessed what everyone else was trying not to think. This wasn't a request. It was a condition. The room pulled in a breath and held it like it was collateral to. I traced the red flag. Sentence with my gaze. Interest dressed as kindness. Default terms that understood winter. Collateral that knew my street by name. When you've seen enough contracts, you learn the difference between ink and appetite. This puts my house at risk, I said. It won't come to that, he replied too quickly, like someone closing a door before the wind can prove a point. Then, you don't need me, I answered. Calm as leverage that doesn't ask for permission. He leaned back, arms over the chair like a man claiming a fence line with his shoulders. If you won't sign, he repeated her line as if it belonged to him, you can't stay. I looked at my daughter, past the sentence to the years standing behind it. Soccer sidelines, science projects, emergency rooms, moving days, the quiet heavy of envelopes slid across kitchen counters at midnight. I could name the nights by the smell of the coffee brewed for them. Support isn't the same as surrender, I said. She placed her palm flat on the cloth like she could smooth the evening into something else. We're asking you to help your family. I said. Accounting doesn't need volume when the ledger is full. I closed the folder and moved it away from my plate space. The pen rolled an inch and stopped as if it, too, understood the difference between proximity and consent. I straightened my napkin. Small orders inside, big messes. Keep your hands honest. Around the edges of the room, silhouettes shifted in the hallway mirror. A cousin, an aunt, a neighbor pretending to check on the rolls. People love a show they can narrate later. He was given a choice. That's how they'd phrase it. Ultimatums prefer tidy words. I stood. Not in anger. In alignment. My chair scraped the floor with the soft patience of someone who has learned that leaving early can be a kind of kindness. I slid on my jacket. Fabric remembers backs that have carried other people's winters. Thank you for dinner, I said. Because politeness is sometimes the last boundary you can control in a room trying to price you. Her husband opened his mouth. I lifted a hand, not to silence, just to end the rehearsal. It's your house, I added. Your rules. The apple pie I brought sat cooling on a side table. I wrapped it in a clean towel from the chair because good food shouldn't be punished for bad manners. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. A message that could wait for a quieter kind of room, the hallway mirror. A version of me I hadn't seen in years looked back. The one who remembers that saying no is a way of telling the truth. I turned enough to see my daughter without giving the rest of the table the satisfaction of my face. You said, if you won't sign, you can't stay. I repeated, gently. I won't sign. And I won't stay. The doorknob was cooler than the room. Outside air carried the kind of honesty candles can't fake. Behind me, the house adjusted to the new weight of its own decision. Ahead of me, the steps measured the distance between a condition and a choice. People will ask later how we got here. As if nights like this are born in an hour and not assembled over years. If you want a real answer, you don't start with the folder. You start with the hands that paid the bills no one remembers, and the moment gratitude learned to speak a different language. The thing about a single no is that it sounds unreasonable to people who only remember your yes. If you want to understand what happened at that table, you have to see the years that made it possible. Not the holidays and photos, those. Lie politely. The ledger tells the truth that it started small, the way help always does when you love someone who hasn't learned how money behaves in the real world. December 2016. The heater died in their first winter together. The baby had a cough, and a bill on the counter did its best to frighten everybody. I paid the repairman before the truck pulled into the driveway. $482.67. The receipt had a coffee ring on it by the time it reached my fridge. People keep trophies on mantles. Parents keep proof on magnets because we need to remind ourselves that we did what we could. Spring 2018 was tires and a cracked windshield. June 2019 was a security deposit they promised to return in October. October arrived. Promises didn't. I didn't chase it. Love makes a strange accountant of you. Quick with the outgoings, slow with the collections. Then came the louder things. The house they couldn't quite qualify for on their own, even with both incomes and a spreadsheet that dressed hope as affordability. Banks do not loan against optimism, so I became the missing number that pushed the approval over the line. No signatures on this one, just a private arrangement I swallowed because the idea of them finally settling tasted like a future I wanted for them. I covered the difference on closing day because their math forgot about taxes and title fees. $6,340.12 wired at 9:14 a.m. I remember the time because I watched the teller check the screen twice, like maybe kindness requires a second confirmation that I bought a crib when they were still arguing over paint. A car seat when the old one failed a recall they didn't have time to read. I replaced a roof shingle the day before a storm because the latter and I have an agreement. We pretend we're younger than we are if the work is worth the lie. Christmases were big when money was small, and I liked it that way. The kind of festive that makes a child think magic is just a word for people who plan early and wrap well. There were the invisible payments too, the utility bills I handled. Just this once, when the months ran together. The grocery runs that saved the day. The credit card balance I killed because the interest rate sounded like someone whistling while they steal. I never announced these things. Announcements are for people who need applause. I needed them to sleep without counting past due notices. Before they closed their eyes, people like to say support was mutual. There were dinners, sure. A Father's Day mug in 2020 that says, "World's Best Problem Solver." Hairline on the cartoon thicker than mine. I love that mug. Still, mugs don't change balances. Gratitude does, but only when it knows the difference between thank you and what next. Then, 2021. He lost hours at work, and temporary became a word that learned to linger. I carried 2 months of their mortgage quietly because the bank doesn't care about promises, and I didn't want the house, my grandchild's first address. Learning the sound of fear too young. $3,128.54 in June. $3,128.54 in July. I didn't tell anyone. Pride is a private thing, so is rescue. Every one of those lines in my memory has a document in a folder at home. Not because I imagined a courtroom, because I've lived long enough to know memory is a generous editor. Paper is brutal and fair. Bank confirmations, screenshots of Zelle transfers with "will pay you back ASAP" in the memo line. ASAP, it turns out, is a language with no calendar. There were other kinds of showing up too. Mornings in emergency rooms, nights on their couch with a toolbox and a back that asked better questions than I answered. The kind of labor nobody invoices. For because the payment is supposed to be something better than money. Respect, maybe. Or the benefit of the doubt when doubt becomes a house guest. If you asked my daughter back, then whether I meddled too much, she would have said I saved them more than once. If you ask her now, she might say I withheld the one thing that would have fixed everything. No is a mirror. People don't like what it shows them if they've gotten used to yes making their reflection generous that I am telling you this, because there's a version of the story where I am stubborn, unhelpful, cruel even. Stories are elastic until you pin them to dates and amounts. In my desk drawer there's a spreadsheet, not because I expected to use it as a weapon, but because I wanted a parent's memory to have witnesses when nostalgia tried to tidy up what actually happened. Columns for date, amount, purpose. Notes like urgent, baby formula and rent, and car alternator, stranded. The column labeled returned has fewer answers than a kind heart would hope for. Helping felt right until it started feeling expected. Expected turned into required. Required learned to dress as love. That's the moment a ledger stops being generosity and becomes gravity to SO. When a folder slid into my dessert space with a pen aligned like a compass needle, it wasn't the beginning. It was just the neatest version of a pattern that had learned. To wear a dinner jacket. The loan they wanted me to bless wasn't a bridge. They always call it that. It was a bet with my roof sitting at the table as collateral. And that's where we go next. The paper that smiled while it reached for the only home I have left to lose. They called it a bridge, the way salesmen call a balloon payment flexibility. Bridges are supposed to take you somewhere you can't reach on your own. This one started on my porch and ended in my living room with no exit for me if there. Footing slipped, he brought the papers in a manila folder that pretended to be harmless. Over coffee, casual like weather talk, he said the word formality 3 times, as if repetition could file down the edges of risk. My daughter stood behind his shoulder, chin lifted like she'd decided this was the hill her adulthood would be proven on. I've read enough contracts to know where the teeth hide. Page 2, small paragraph that begins friendly and ends hungry. Interest rate with a smile that doesn't reach its eyes. Variable, not fixed. Indexed to a number that always seems to go up when life goes down. Then the collateral clause, my name tiptoeing into the paragraph like it wandered there by accident. It hadn't. The language was precise. In the event of default, co-signer's assets may be subject to collection. In English, my roof, my walls, the chair that remembers my shape. Look, he said, tapping the header with a pen that had someone else's logo on it. It's pre-approved. We just need your signature to lock it. It's basically done. Pre-approved, I said, is the word they use when they're not sure you'll read the rest. My daughter slid a brochure across the table, mock-ups of the renovation the loan would fund. Open concept. New appliances. A deck where summer could pretend it. Last longer. The pictures were beautiful. Hope always is when it's printed on glossy paper. What's the plan if ours get cut again? I asked him, not unkind. What's your runway? He glanced at her instead of me. We'll manage. We just need the start. The problem with just need the start is that it confuses ignition with fuel. I looked at their budget. Numbers that worked if nothing broke, no one got sick, and time finally agreed to behave. There was a line for miscellaneous that would vanish the first time a tire found a nail. Why me? I asked, though I knew the answer. My credit is clean because I keep it that way. Not because I've had easier winters. Because I've learned to buy coats in October. Because your family, my daughter said, meaning, because you always have. Because the bank respects you. Because we're tired of no that he leaned in. It's not like they'll come for your house. They? Well, if you miss enough payments, I said. That's what co means. We share the risk. But the risk sits on my side of the table. He tried the other door, the one labeled guilt. We're building a home here. For your grandchild. You'll be here all the time. Don't. You want to help us build something worthy. I thought of the crib I built with my hands, the roof patch I climbed for, the mortgage top UPS I wired without fanfare. Worthy doesn't come from wood and glass. Worthy comes from paying what you promised and saying thank you like you mean it. I won't co-sign this, I said. The air in the kitchen changed its mind about being warm. He blinked. She went. Very still. Silence stretched long enough to prove it had a job to do. Then the campaign began. Calls from numbers that love me when they need me. Messages in the family chat about support and togetherness. A voice note where my refusal was a betrayal spoken gently enough to pass for concern. They told me it was a formality. The contract told me it was a lien with manners that I took a red pen and marked the parts people prefer not to see when they're in love with a picture. Interest, variable. Late fees, stackable. Acceleration on default, immediate. Collateral, available. I printed 2 copies, one for a folder, one for my coat pocket. Because there's a difference between knowing and remembering when the room gets loud at dinner, when the folder slid across my plate space and the pen lined up like a runway. I'd already read the weather report. It was going to storm, one way or another. The question wasn't whether I could afford to sign. It was whether I could afford to teach them that my name is something you put under your dreams when you're not willing to stand under them yourself. If you've never been told that love looks like underwriting someone else's risk, you might think I was being hard. But love is not a credit line. And a roof isn't a lesson until it leaks on the right heads. They said sign and stay. I said no and stood. And because no never arrives alone, it brought company, a ledger, a folder, and the decision to let paper do the talking the next time someone tried to speak for me. It started with the soft power plays, the kind that were concerned like perfume. A missed call from my daughter at 7:02 a.m., then another at 7:05. A text at 7:07. Can we please talk? It's important. I let the phone sit face down beside my coffee. Important has a way of meaning urgent only to the person saying it.by 8:15. The family group chat woke up. First, a photo of my grandson's drawing. A house with 6 windows. And a sun the size of summer. Under it, we're building a future here, Dad. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. The drawing wasn't for me. It was for the jury they were assembling. 8903, my sister chimed in. He's always been there for you. Don't push him. She meant me, but the sentence was crooked enough to lean both ways. At 9:30, a cousin who never pays for his own oil changes volunteered wisdom. Family is about sacrifice. Sacrifice is a strange word. People love it most when they're not the ones bleeding. The neighbor sent a voice note at noon, soft-spoken like a pastor who believes tone can sanctify content. Brother, sometimes God asks us to step out in faith, he said. If you co-sign, you're sowing into their stability. I saved the message. Not because it moved me, but because documentation is a habit I trust when memory gets theatrical. By late afternoon, my daughter called again, and this time I answered. No point pretending the campaign could be ignored into silence. Dad, she started immediately. No hello. You're making this hostile. I'm not making it anything, I said. I'm not signing a contract that puts my home at risk. We would never let it get that far. That's what people say right before it gets that far. She exhaled. So you don't trust us? I trust math, I said. And I trust history. Both are asking me to be careful. She pivoted. We've done everything for you. We make holidays happen. We watch your dog. I let her finish. Tally sheets arrive in many formats. Thank you, I said. And I've covered mortgages, repairs, deposits, emergencies. We're not trading ledgers. We're talking about a loan. Silence. Then the sharper tool. If you loved us the way you say you do, she said, quieter now, you'd help. Love as leverage. It always arrives with the precision of a locksmith. I watched steam lift off my mug and disappear before I answered. Help that asks me to risk my home is not help. It's an exchange. You can call it what you like. My roof still goes on the scale. The group chat migrated from public to private. A 3-person thread appeared. Her husband, me. The husband took the wheel. We've spoken to the bank, he typed. They said with your cosign, approval is immediate. We can start next week. It's not a big ask. I replied with a photo of the contract's collateral clause, the sentence, highlighted in yellow. This is the big ask, I wrote. It just doesn't look big when you're not the one holding it. He sent 3 messages in a row. You're overreacting. We're not kids. This is ridiculous. Then, the quiet threat dressed. As consequence, we can't live like this. If you're not with us, we have to set boundaries. Boundaries. The word people discover when control stops answering the door. Other relatives tried the chorus approach. He's being stubborn. He's lonely. Ignore him. He'll come around. My favorite was from a second cousin who hasn't visited in 5 years. Sometimes parents forget their job is to support. I took a screenshot, archived it with the rest, and made a sandwich. Protein makes patience easier. That evening, my daughter called one more time. No script this round. Just the gravel of a day spent arguing a feeling into fact. Last chance, she said. Sign tomorrow, and we'll put this behind us. If not, don't come over for a while. It's too much. There it was. The dinner line, now with a calendar. You're asking me to trade presents for collateral. I said, I won't. You're choosing a house over your family. I'm choosing not to be homeless for my family, I said. Those are different sentences. She hung up with a small sound that used to mean she'd scraped a knee. This time, the floor was her pride. I sat with the quiet. It felt honest. Then I opened a new spreadsheet and began a ledger I never thought I'd need. Date, amount, purpose, method returned. I pulled bank statements for the last 8 years. I tagged transfers, printed confirmations, and titled a folder, support provided. Not to wave like a flag. To anchor myself when the weather turned into words. I also printed their loan agreement again, marked the risky clauses in red, and added a one-page summary. Income variability, debt-to-income ratio, buffer shortfall, interest exposure, collateral risk to primary residence. Numbers don't argue, they inform. I wasn't going to debate feelings in a room where paper could keep everyone honest. By midnight, the group chat tried one last time. We're having people over Sunday, the husband wrote. Come if you're ready to be reasonable. Sunday. Works, I replied. I'll bring the folder. The typing bubble appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. What folder? The one that remembers what we forget when we're excited. People think pressure changes decisions. Sometimes. It just finishes them. I closed the laptop, put both folders by the door, and set my alarm. Strategy sleeps best when it knows the morning has a plan. I've learned that arguments are just weather. Plans are architecture. That night, after the last message tried to rename coercion as reasonable, I turned the volume down on my phone and turned the lamp up on my desk. If they wanted Sunday to be a decision day, I would bring something better than opinions. I would bring order. The first tab I opened was a blank spreadsheet. Names make things real, so I titled it, Support Provided, 2016 to Present. For columns, appeared like old friends, date, amount, purpose, method. A fifth waited like a question that already knew its answer, returned. I don't keep score to win. I keep score to remember what a clean conscience actually costs. Bank statements tell. There's stories in grayscale. I pulled 8 years' worth, exported the ones that covered winters, emergencies, and quiet rescues no one admitted out loud. The first line I entered wasn't the biggest. It was the heater repair in December 2016. $482.67. Paid at point of service, card on file, mine. In the notes cell, I wrote, infant cough, no heat, arrived 6:42 p.m. Memory is kinder than truth. Notes fix that. The ledger filled like a photo developing in slow water. January 2018. Cracked windshield, $269. March 2018. 2 tires, $311. June 2019. Security deposit, temporary, $1,200. Returned? Blank. October 2019. We promised. Blank stays blank. 2 mortgage top-ups in 2021. Identical $3,128.54 entries that felt heavier in hindsight. Tuition emergency for a night class he thought would fix the schedule problem. Groceries the week the card glitched. The credit card payoff I swore I'd never do again. It turns out never is a word that loves to test you. By the second hour, I added a summary tab that totaled the outflows by year. The sheet did the math I already understood in my bones. Generosity had been a habit long enough to be mistaken for policy. I printed the yearly totals and clipped them behind the itemized pages. Paper is proof. Weight is persuasion. Next, I prepared the second folder, risk, loan cosign exposure. On top, I placed a clean, unmarked copy of the loan agreement they'd called a formality. Behind it, the version I'd sliced open with a red pen, variable interest highlighted, late fee stacking boxed, default acceleration underlined, collateral, clause annotated with one sentence in bold. Cosigner's primary residence is not protected from collection. People hear what they need until the font gets big enough. I added a one-page memo with bullet points. Not a lecture. An index. Current household income variability. Documented schedule cuts. Last 3 pay stubs reflect swing. Debt to income. Ratio, calculated from their own bank statements. Thin buffer. Emergency fund shortfall, 2 weeks of expenses, best case. Renovation timeline risk, income dependent. Cost overrun probability high. Cosigner collateral exposure, my home. Unacceptable. I included screenshots. A chart of card APRs, a graph showing rate hikes over the last 24 months, a tier sheet explaining variable versus fixed in language that doesn't flinch. I wasn't going to shame anyone. I was going to remove the excuses that speak when reality becomes inconvenient. Then I collected the smaller proofs that always land harder than the grand totals. A photo of the crib I assembled, timestamped. The email confirming the Rush plumber appointment. The Zelle memo that said, "We'll pay you back next month," with 3 exclamation points and no calendar. A grocery receipt where the cashier circled, "Thank you," because I made her laugh about coupons. People say love isn't about money. They're right. But money is often how love buys time for people to learn better. I labeled the first folder ledger and the second risk. Labels matter when rooms get loud. On my way to the kitchen, I passed the mirror in the hall. The man looking back at me didn't look like a victim of anyone's story. He looked like a steward of his own. There's a difference between being generous and being available for extraction. Sunday, I decided, would make that difference visible. I set the folders by the door with my keys, then walked back to the desk for one last piece. A page titled, "Talking Points, Calm Only." I wrote 3 sentences. I'm not co-signing. This is not a debate. Here is the factual record of support I've already provided. Here is the risk you're asking me to assume. Here are safer alternatives. Under alternatives, I listed options I would actually help with: a financial counselor to rework their budget, pausing non-essential expenses, applying for a smaller, fixed-rate personal loan in only their names, a side income plan he'd mentioned once and abandoned when weekends felt expensive. Boundary isn't refusal, it's definition. Before bed, I walked the house the way people do when they're checking windows in a storm. Not for locks. Those were set, but for reassurance that the life I had built didn't need someone else's permission to stand. I put a small plant by the kitchen window back on its saucer. I rinsed the coffee pot. Small order, big mess. It's a ritual that has rescued me more than once. The phone buzzed once. Late message, Sunday at 4. Just us and a couple friends. Friends, plural. Witnesses, really. Control loves an audience. I replied, 4 is fine. Then I added, because I've learned to write like a person who expects to be quoted. I'll bring documents to keep the conversation clear. I slept well, not because I looked forward to any of it, but because I knew exactly what I would and wouldn't do. That's what preparation is. The art of making tomorrow a place where your past can't be rewritten by someone who didn't pay for it. On Sunday, I chose a quiet shirt and the pair of shoes that don't make a sound on hardwood. I tucked both folders under my arm and left 10 minutes early. Arriving calm is a strategy. People mistake punctuality for concession. It's just respect for time, for truth, for the part of you that refuses to argue with noise when paper can do it better. The porch light was on though the sun hadn't quit yet. Through the window, I saw chairs arranged like a panel was waiting to hear a confession. Good. I had one. It began with numbers and ended with a sentence that doesn't wobble. No. People argue with feelings. Paper argues with history. I didn't come to win a debate. I came to end one. The living room had been staged like a town hall. Chairs in a loose half circle, coffee table cleared, coasters ready for a hospitality that felt borrowed. 2 of their friends sat on the far side, polite faces practicing neutrality. My daughter hovered near the mantel, rearranging a candle that didn't need rearranging. He paced once, then chose the seat with the best sight line to the door, like he wanted to own the exits. Let's be adults about this, he started. Great, I said, setting the first folder on the table. Adults love documents. I placed ledger in the center and flipped it open to the summary page. No speeches, just a finger on numbers. 2016, $2,347. 2017, $3,012. 2018, $2,945. 2019, $5,006. 2020, $1,781. 2021, $7,257. 2022, $2,194. 2023 to date, $1,430. I didn't look up for reactions. Respect is reading the totals aloud like they deserve a quiet room. Her friend leaned forward despite herself. Is that all money you gave them? Given, loaned, covered, I said. Words differ. Balances don't. He made a small, dismissive sound. Nickel and diming. That's the thing about nickels, I said, turning the page to itemized entries. They become dimes when you stack them. Then dollars. Then debts that learn to walk around. Dressed as expectations. I slid out a few key receipts. The heater repair with the coffee ring. The June and July mortgage top UPS. The security deposit temporary. That stayed temporary. Beside them, I placed a printout of the Zelle transfers with memo lines that read like a chorus. We'll pay you back next month. You're a lifesaver. Last time promise. I didn't smile. Promises have a taste when they go stale. My daughter's voice was careful. Dad, this isn't fair. What's unfair is asking someone to put their home on a contract after years of telling them their help is small enough to forget. I kept my tone even. I don't need you to apologize for taking help. I need you to stop pretending it didn't happen. He reached for the papers, paused when I didn't move my hand. Control hates asking. We're not here to rehash the past, he said. We're here to fix the future. Good, I said, and opened the second folder. Risk. The red-marked loan agreement sat on top, patient as a fire alarm. I placed the clean copy beside it for contrast. Ink versus appetite. Your future asks my house to co-sign. That's not fixing. That's mortgaging my safety for your renovation. I pointed to the highlighted lines. Variable interest rate. Late fee compounding. Acceleration clause. Collateral exposure. Then the one-page memo with plain English bullets. Your income swings. Your debt to income is tight. Your buffer is thin. A deck won't make these numbers better. His friend shifted, cleared his throat. To be fair, lots of people co-sign. Lots of people also regret it, I said, sliding over a rate hike chart. Feelings aside, this is math during a season where money costs more than last year. My daughter's eyes shone with the kind of water pride won't admit to. We just wanted to build something. So did I said softer now. I built a habit of saying yes, so often you mistook it for a rule. I laid down the smaller proofs. The crib photo, the plumber confirmation, the grocery receipt with the cashier's circled thank you. These aren't accusations. They're anchors. They keep this conversation from drifting into the fog, where I'm the villain for not underwriting a loan your bank already thinks is risky. He tried one more door. If you loved us, I raised a hand, polite as a stop sign. I do. Which is why I won't teach you that love is a credit line, or that boundaries bend if you bring enough spectators. The room changed its posture. His friends were very still, the kind of still that means they're pretending to be furniture for the sake of the people who invited them. My daughter looked at the totals again, as if the numbers might change if she blinked. Kinder, I slid a final page across the table. Alternatives. Here's what I will do, I said. I'll pay for 3 sessions with a financial counselor who will build you a budget that breathes. I'll help source fixed-rate options in only your names. I'll contribute in cash to a necessary repair, not a renovation, with an invoice and a cap. I'll help him set up the weekend side work he talked about and quit. All of those help. None of those use my deed as seasoning. He scoffed. That's nothing. It's grown up, I said. So is hearing no. Silence settled the way dust does after someone stops fanning the air. In it, I gathered the pages into neat stacks, totals atop items, items atop proof, proof atop alternatives. A story with chapters you could hold. When I leave today, I said, this folder goes back with me. Not because I'm hiding it, but because I no longer leave my safety in other people's houses. Her friend spoke, finally. It's clear, she said, to no one and everyone. Clearer than I expected. Clarity is a kind of mercy when you've been living in negotiations. I closed both folders, set them side by side, and looked at my daughter, not past her. I won't co-sign, I repeated gently. I will help you grow up your money. Those are different kinds of love. She nodded once, a small, shaking thing. There are moments you hate the lesson because you know it's true. This was one of them. The clock on the mantel clicked. The house breathed like it remembered what walls are for. I put my palm on the folders and then on my knee. ready to stand if anyone decided to turn paper into a performance. Now, I said, if we're done trying to rename the past, we can talk about what happens next. He cleared his throat like a man about to chair a meeting. Okay, he said, palms out, half smile loaded for optics. Let's resolve this like adults. Adults, I've learned, don't need a stage. They need a standard. I'm not co-signing, I said first, so the knight couldn't pretend to forget. This is not a debate. I placed both folders in the center of the coffee table and sat back, posture easy, voice calm. When people expect noise, silence becomes authority that he pivoted to his witnesses. You see what I'm dealing with? He asked his friends, palms flipping as if to show pockets empty of options. It was a performance for the room, the beleaguered son-in-law versus the unreasonable parent. The oldest play in a very small theater. Before we perform, I said, let's confirm the facts. I opened the ledger folder to the top page. 8 years of financial support. Itemized. Dated. Receipted. I slid the summary toward the center and let the columns breathe in plain sight. This isn't to embarrass anyone. It's to anchor the conversation to what actually happened. His friend on the left leaned forward, then sat back as if the paper had heat. The other friend watched my daughter, not me, a loyalist taking emotional cues. My daughter stood by the mantel with her hands clasped, knuckles white, face working on neutral. She has always hated numbers that don't care how you feel. He tried to redirect. We're not talking about the past. We are, I said, because the past built the present. And the present is asking me to collateralize my roof. If your case is strong, the facts won't hurt it. I turned to the loan agreement. The clean copy on the left, the red-marked autopsy on the right. It looked almost theatrical laid out like that. Innocence mirrored against its own shadow. This, I tapped the red highlight, is the collateral clause. It's the sentence where my home leaves my pocket and climbs into your risk. Variable interest here, compounding late fees here, acceleration on default here. The bank believes. This needs a second adult's credit to be safe. I agree it needs a second adult. I disagree that the second adult should be me. He scoffed. It's a renovation, not a casino. Renovations become casinos when budgets are fantasies. I said, your income swings. Your buffer is 2 weeks at best. A deck doesn't make math kinder. The friend on the right cleared his throat. To be fair, they're trying to improve their home. So am I said, by keeping mine. My daughter spoke then, small voice trying on a heavier coat. Dad, we wanted to do this together. As a family. We can, I said gently, and flipped the page to alternatives. Counselor for the budget. Fixed rate options in your names only. I'll help with a necessary repair, invoice, and cap. I'll even spend Saturdays helping him set up the side work he keeps promising to start. Those are family solutions. Co-signing is an emergency brake on my life. He sat forward, elbows on knees, brand of sincerity turned up a notch. You talk about family, but where's the trust? Trust, I said, is why I wrote the checks you've forgotten. And it's why I won't sign the paper you want me to forget to read. The air changed, the way rooms do when a story runs out of stage light. He looked to his friends again, but neither wanted the next line. I could feel the living room decide it was tired of being a courtroom and start becoming a room again. He pushed his chair back a little too fast. Enough, he said. You're making us look bad in front of our friends. I'm making you look like your paperwork, I said. If that looks bad, edit the paperwork. My daughter blinked hard. Tears made her irises bright. I didn't mean for it to be like this, she said, voice catching. I wanted a yes for once without feeling like I owed you a speech. You don't owe me a speech. I said, you owe the truth the courtesy of being named. This is not about love. It's about a loan. And I won't lend you my house. The mantel clock ticked like it finally had the room's permission. I gathered the pages, aligned the edges, slid the totals back on top. I'm leaving these alternatives with you, I said, pulling a separate copy from the folder and placing it in front of her. They're not glamorous. They work. He couldn't help himself. It's insulting, he said. You'd rather nickel and dime with repairs than let us build something real. Real doesn't need my deed, I said. Real pays its invoices and says thank you without a calendar. One of his friends stood up, palms out in a small truce. I think you've both said what you need to say. I've said what I won't do, I corrected. And what I will. He exhaled through his nose. An animal learning it won't be fed. So that's it. That's it, I said. No cosign. Yes to help that doesn't foreclose my address. My daughter took the alternatives page in both hands like a fragile thing. If we try this route, she said carefully, will you? I'll show up where the math does, I said, softer than I felt. And I'll step back where it doesn't. He stood abruptly, needing motion to replace outcome. You can go, he said. We'll talk. I was going, I said, and smiled in the way you do when you refuse to be drafted into someone else's tantrum. I slid the ledger and risk folders into my bag, then paused and set one sheet on the table, the one-page summary with the highlighted clause. Keep this, I said. When you're tempted to call me stubborn, read the sentence that wants my house more than your plan wants a budget. On my way to the door, his friend touched my sleeve lightly. For what it's worth, he said in a low voice. That was very clear. Clarity is kind, I said. It saves time people can use to grow. I stepped onto the porch, where the air had honest edges, and let the door close without the sound of victory. Victory is loud. Boundaries are quiet. On the walk to my car, my phone buzzed. A new message in the family group. A single line from a relative who hadn't said a word in months. Proud of you for keeping your roof. No emojis. No sermon. Just a sentence that knew which parts of a life are not up for negotiation. Inside the car, I set the folders on the passenger seat and watched the living room window for a moment. The silhouettes moved, smaller now, like people who had to sit with a mirror and decide whether to keep arguing with it or start using it. I turned the key and let the engine find its own calm. There would be fallout. There always is when gravity stops pretending it's optional. But the heaviest part was over, the part where a room chooses a story. Tonight, it chose the one with numbers. Fallout doesn't arrive like thunder. It seeps in through the seams after the door clicks shut and no one has a performance to play for anymore. But I hadn't reached the end of the block when my phone lit up with a message from my daughter. Can we talk tomorrow? Just us. No punctuation at the end. People who are done shouting use fewer marks. I parked at home and placed the folders on the kitchen table. Ledger on the left, risk on the right, like bookends holding up the part of my life I intended to keep standing. The house met me with the kind of quiet that doesn't test your resolve. I made tea. Steam rose without asking for witnesses. 10 minutes later, the group chat got loud without me. I read the previews on my lock screen the way you check the weather without opening the door. He embarrassed us in our own home. That wasn't fair. He stacked the deck. It's his house on the line, not yours. Screenshots started landing from relatives who sit on fences they didn't build. Come on, he's old school. Let him be. He helped you for years. Maybe try a budget. This is why I never borrow from family. He texted me separately at 7:31 p.m. You didn't have to bring paperwork. At 7:32, we could have kept it private. At 7:34, truth without its costume. It was weak to put me on the spot. I typed, then deleted, then typed again. I've learned that replies written to win are expensive. I answered at 7:41. Documents keep conversations clear. No cosign. Will help with alternatives. No lecture. No fuel. I set the phone face down and let the kettle finish its argument with the AI. R.AT805, my daughter called. I answered on the second ring. Her voice had the fine cracks of a vase that's learned to hold water anyway. Dad, she said. I'm sorry. She wasn't confessing. She was surrendering to clarity. There's a difference. I know you're not the villain, she said. I just wanted an easier way. Easier now, I said, doesn't mean safer later. Silence. The kind that puts its hand on both our shoulders at once. Then, softer. Will you send me the counselor's info? I'll text it tonight, I said. And the fixed rate options. Start there. She exhaled. He's mad. I know, I said. Anger is loud when it loses its favorite tool. I don't want to lose you. You won't, I said. You just won't use me. After the call, I wrote myself a brief record. Date, time, key points, tone, because memory loves revision when emotions arrive late. I placed the page in the ledger folder, not as evidence for anyone else, as protection for the part of me that keeps the story straight when nostalgia shows up with a paintbrush. By 9:15, I had 3 separate side messages from relatives who had been furniture in the room earlier. For what it's worth, you were right. I wish my dad had said no earlier. Boundaries are love too. They didn't post those words in the group. Approval prefers privacy when courage has a cost. At 10:03, a new thread appeared without me. One of his friends. He made us look stupid. The other. Numbers don't lie. They drifted away from consensus and left my daughter to tidy the evening. You can always tell whose house it really is by who stacks the chairs that I slept. Not the heroic kind. The kind that happens when a decision finally stops knocking on the inside of your skull. Morning brought a smaller world. Fewer pings, more sunlight. I poured oatmeal into a bowl and looked at my budget. Ordinary numbers doing ordinary work. My expenses didn't spike because I refused to co-sign. My roof didn't become kinder or crueler. It simply remained. Mine. Midday, a message from my daughter. A photo of the alternatives page, highlighted in 3 places. "We'll try these," she wrote. "Will you come with me to the first counseling session?" I replied, "Yes." Then, because I meant it, "Proud of you." He didn't write for 2 days. When he did, he arranged 6 words like he'd never met humility before. "We'll do it our way then." I let the words pass like weather. Some storms need to spend themselves on empty fields. That evening, I packed a small overnight bag, 2 shirts, toiletries, a book, and took it to a friend's guest room. Not exile, a Sabbath. Space to let the noise discharge without making a home of it. On the nightstand, I left my phone face down again. Peace checks who you invite to the quiet. Before sleep, I wrote 1 line on a note card and slid it under the lamp. A boundary is where love stops pretending it's alone. I've learned to seed my future with sentences that will be needed more than once. The next morning, I woke up to a calmer thread. A single message from my daughter, budget session booked. Saturday, 11. Under it, a screenshot of a fixed-rate pre-qualification page. No emojis. No theater. Just the architecture of adulthood finally choosing to build itself. I went home and put both folders back on the shelf, spine out, reachable. Not trophies. Tools. I watered the plant by the window and watched its leaves find the light without my help. The house didn't feel empty. It felt defended. Pride knocks for a while. After an audience leaves, dignity answers the door once, then closes it softly. I chose dignity. The fallout kept its distance. The storm didn't end in one night. It just stopped raining where I stood. Back home, the days found a slower rhythm. My mornings no longer began with the low-grade dread of a message preview flashing on my phone. Coffee tasted like coffee. Again, not adrenaline. The house felt larger, though its walls hadn't moved. Space grows when you reclaim the square footage you were loaning to someone else's urgency. I started tending to the things that had been quietly waiting for me. The leaky kitchen faucet got fixed on a Tuesday afternoon without anyone texting. "Can you cover this month?" I took my old bike in for servicing and rode it down roads I used to drive past on my way to help. Groceries were lighter in the cart because feeding one person doesn't require negotiation or apology. Money, in the absence of constant withdrawal, behaves differently. By the end of the first month, the account that had been shrinking on schedule sat healthier than it had in years. I printed the statement, not to gloat, but to see the proof that peace has a balance sheet. On the bottom, I penciled a note. "This is what no buys you." Old friends noticed the change before I did. "You look rested," one said over lunch. I realized then how long I'd been presenting exhaustion as generosity. Sometimes, people thank you for showing up, even when you look like you've been carrying furniture alone for years. It's not until you set it down that you notice the room was never yours to arrange. I still saw my daughter, on my terms. We met for coffee in public spaces where the conversation stayed lighter. She updated me on the budget counseling, the fixed-rate application, the weekend side work her husband had finally started. Progress happens when excuses run out of company. There were awkward silences we didn't bother filling. That was new for us. It turned out we didn't need constant talking to keep the bond. Just mutual respect for the space between meetings. Boundary work is slow carpentry. You measure twice before you cut, and sometimes you leave the wood alone until both sides know it will fit. Saturdays were mine again. I repainted the front porch, not because it needed it, but because it was my decision to make for a house with my name on the deed and no extra signatures creeping onto the paperwork. I thought often about the word help. How it wears different clothes depending on who says it. I decided help that leaves you smaller isn't help. It's consumption. And love, stripped to its honest frame, doesn't consume what it values. From the quiet, lessons began to set like concrete. People respect the boundaries you enforce, not the ones you announce. Receipts aren't just for banks. They're for the moments when someone tries to rewrite the story in their favor. Self-preservation isn't selfish. It's the upkeep that allows generosity to exist at all point one evening. I found the note I'd written during the fallout. A boundary is where love stops pretending it's alone. I taped it inside the ledger folder, not as a warning to them, as a reminder to myself that I still kept both folders, ledger and risk, on the shelf in plain sight. Not trophies, not weapons, just tools. The kind you don't throw away, because one day you might need to repair something in yourself before you repair it with anyone else. Life had become quieter, but not smaller. In cutting away the noise, I'd made room for things that fit. A calmer home, manageable responsibilities, conversations not steeped in hidden invoices. Storms can strip you bare, but they also wash the air clean. And when you step outside, you realize the ground is yours to stand on. Firm, steady, and free from anyone else's mortgage on your peace. Some endings don't sound like finales. There's no triumphant music, no applause. Just a quiet house, a steady breath, and the knowledge that the choice you made will hold in any weather. In the weeks after the storm settled, I thought a lot about the word love, how casually it gets laid over things that have no business carrying its weight. People say, if you love me, you'll, and then fill in the blank with whatever fear or desire they want you to fund. But love, real love, doesn't hold your roof ransom. It doesn't need collateral, and it certainly doesn't demand you sign away your stability to prove it exists. I learned that the hard way, through years of confusing generosity with obligation, thinking that saying yes was the same as being kind. It isn't. Sometimes yes is the cowardly way to avoid the storm. Sometimes no is the only honest shelter you can offer both yourself and the other person. The moral, for anyone willing to hear it, is this: a parent's wallet is not a contract. Gratitude is. Saying no doesn't end your love. It ends your silence. These are not lines meant to wound. They're meant to mark the edge where one life stops being consumed by another's needs disguised as inevitabilities. I've had people tell me I should have given in for the sake of peace. But peace built on surrender is just a ceasefire. You're always one favor away from the war starting again. The kind of peace I chose may have been lonely for a few nights, but it has a foundation. And I trust anything with roots more than anything built for a photo. My daughter and I are finding a new rhythm. The first counseling session was awkward, a budget laid bare in front of a stranger, with fewer escape hatches than she was used to. But she went. That tells me the door for trust isn't closed. It's just locked to bad habits that I ask for him. I don't expect an apology. People who see boundaries as personal insults rarely apologize for ramming them. That's not my work to do. My work is keeping the line where I drew it, so that next time, there's less confusion about what's mine to give. Closure, I've learned, isn't about making someone else understand. It's about making peace with the fact that they might not, and still acting in a way you can live with. The last page in my ledger folder is blank. I left it that way on purpose, not for more debts or one last rescues, but for the notes I'll make about what comes next. Shared meals without invoices, visits without hidden terms, love without paperwork. That's the account I want to keep adding to. Some nights I still think about that dinner, the folder sliding across, the fork hitting the plate. I don't replay the ultimatum. I replay the moment I stood, took my jacket, and left the pie wrapped in a towel. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was mine. When the day comes that I'm gone, my daughter will find those folders. Maybe she'll read them and see stubbornness. Maybe she'll see a map of what love looked like when it finally refused to confuse itself with surrender. Either way, she'll know that her parent lived on their own terms, and that's a kind of inheritance too. That on my kitchen counter sits a mug from Father's Day 2020, world's best problem solver. It's a little chipped now. I drink from it most mornings, not because I believe the title, but because it makes me smile to think of the day she gave it to me, before help became negotiation. In a way, I am solving a problem, just not the one they imagined. I'm solving the problem of living a life that answers to my values, not someone else's panic. The moral isn't flashy, but it's worth the word count. Love respects the roof you live under. And if it doesn't, it's not love, it's leverage. Out my kitchen window, The morning light catches that little plant I almost forgot to water in all the noise. It's doing fine on its own now. Turns out, most things thrive when you give them enough light, enough room, and no reason to feel like they're in someone else's shadow. And that's where I'll leave it, quietly, without applause, in a home that is mine, in a peace I chose.